I walked up to him, I said, "Now you wouldn't do that to Napoleon Hill, would you?" He said, "Who?" I said, "Napoleon Hill." He said, "No, I wouldn't do that to Napoleon Hill, but I certainly would do it to you." Well, I introduced myself. I took out my credit card and handed it to him and my driver's license, and he said, "Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle." He took the tab and tore it up, and he said, "We just forget about that." And he said, "You may be interested in knowing that I'm on the Glendale police force as a result of reading your book, Think and Grow Rich." Well, the subject now is a positive mental attitude. I want to call your attention to the fact that nothing constructive and worthy of man's efforts ever has been or ever will be achieved except that which comes from a positive mental attitude based on definiteness of purpose and activated by a burning desire and intensified until the burning desire is elevated to the plane of applied faith. Now, here are 5 steps, 5 different conditions of the mind, all of which lead up to a positive mental attitude. Take number 1, for instance, wishes. Everybody has a stock of wishes. They wish for this, they wish for that, and they wish for the other thing. We all have wishes. Well, nothing very much happens when you just wish for things, does it? No. Nothing happens. Well, then you go a little bit further and you become curious. You put in a lot of time through idle curiosity. And do you think anything ever happens worthwhile in connection with the expression of idle curiosity? However, you can and you do consume a lot of time oftentimes with idle curiosity, don't you? You put in a lot of time oftentimes studying what your neighbors do or do not do, what your competitors do or do not do, just out of idle curiosity. Well, that's not leading to a positive mental attitude. Then, a step above that, you have hopes. Your wishes now have taken on a more concrete form. They become hopes, hopes of achievement, hopes of attainment, hope of accomplishment, hopes of accumulation of things that you want. Well, just a hope by itself is not very effective, is it? Because we all have a flock of hopes, but not all of us who have hopes have success. We just hope for success. It is, however, better than wishing for it, isn't it? Well, what is the difference between a hope and a wish? Yes, that's right. A hope is it's beginning to take on the nature of faith, isn't it? That's the idea. You're transmuting a wish into that very desirable state of mind known as faith. Then you come on, you step up your mental attitude to where your hopes are transmuted into something else known as a burning desire. Now, is there any difference between a burning desire and an ordinary desire?
Yes.
That's right. A burning desire is an intensified desire based upon hope, based upon definiteness of purpose. How does one go about developing a burning desire for anything? If I didn't know the answer to this, believe me, I could get me a flock of answers here, couldn't I? That's fine. Well, a burning desire is an obsessional desire, isn't it? And it certainly, you cannot have a burning desire without a motive or motives back of it, can you? Wouldn't it be interesting if you kept a tabulation for 2 or 3 days of the exact amount of time you put in thinking about the no-can-do side of life and the can-do side, or the positive side, the negative side? You might be astounded, even the most successful people would be astounded to find out how many hours they put in each day in negative thinking. And the very outstanding successes in the world, the great leaders, are the ones that put in very little, if any, time in thinking on the negative side. They put in all of their time thinking on the positive side. I once asked Henry Ford if there was anything in the world that he wanted or wanted to do that he couldn't do, and he said no, he didn't believe there was. I asked him if there ever had been. He said, oh yes, back in the early days before he had learned how to use his mind. And I said, well, now, just what do you mean by that? Well, he said, now, when I want a thing, I want to do a thing, I start in finding out what I can do about it. I start doing that, and I don't bother about what I can't do because I just let that alone. That was a homely statement, but I want to tell you there's a world of philosophy wrapped up in that statement. He put his mind into doing something about the part that he could do something about, and thinking about that and not about the part that he couldn't do anything about. I venture the suggestion that if you put a problem to the majority of people, a difficult problem, they will immediately begin to tell you all of the reasons why the problem can't be solved. And if there are some things about the problem that are favorable and some that are unfavorable, the majority of people will see the things that are unfavorable first, and oftentimes never see the favorable side. I don't believe there are any problems in connection with which you can't do something, in connection with which there are not some favorable sides too. I can't think of a single problem that could confront me that wouldn't have a favorable side to it. If nothing else, the favorable side would consist in the fact that I would say that if it's a problem I can solve, I will solve it, and if it's a problem I can't solve, I'll not worry about it. And that's something. But the majority of people, when they're confronted with difficult propositions or problems that they can't solve, they start worrying, and then they go into what kind of a state of mind? Negative state of mind. And do you ever accomplish anything worthwhile when you're in that state of mind? No, you don't. You're only muddying the water when you make your mind negative. You never accomplish anything worthwhile. You have to learn to keep your mind positive all the time when you want to do things worthwhile. Does a positive mental attitude attract opportunities, or does it repel them? Does a negative mental attitude attract favorable opportunities for you, or repel them? It repels them, doesn't it? Definitely. And does that repelling of opportunities have anything to do with your merit or right to have opportunities? Nothing whatsoever. Absolutely not. You may be just, you may have the right to all of the good things in life. You may be entitled to them, but if you have a negative mental attitude, you will repel the opportunities leading to the attainment of those things. So your job, mainly, is to keep your mind positive so it will attract to you the things that you want, the things that you desire, the things that you are going after. Had you ever stopped to think why it is that prayer generally doesn't bring anything about except a negative result? Had you ever stopped to wonder about that? You know, I believe that's the biggest stumbling block of most people in all religions, is they don't understand why prayer sometimes brings the negative results, or why it generally brings negative results. You couldn't expect anything else, because there's a law that governs that. And the law is that your mind attracts to you the counterpart of the things of the things that the mind is feeding upon. There's no exception to that rule. It's a natural law. There's no exceptions for anybody. So if you want to attract through prayer or otherwise the things that you desire, you have to make your mind positive. You not only have to believe, but you have to put action back of that belief and transmute it into faith, applied faith. And you can't have applied faith in a negative state of mind. The two just don't go together. Constructive mottos are often used by people who recognize what a powerful influence one's daily environment has on the maintenance of a positive mental attitude. The entire industrial plant of the R.G. Letourneau Company, with 2,000 employees, was positivized by placing mottos printed in large letters in all departments and changing them weekly, such as the ones that you see here. Now, those mottos were written for a purpose. Every department in that great sprawling plant of the Letourneau Company, every department had those mottos replaced there regularly, sometimes daily in the cafeteria, and in the other departments weekly. And the mottos are written in the letters a half a foot high, so that you could read them all the way across the building. And believe you me, every time they walked into their department, they saw that motto. By the way, we had a funny experience with them. I was standing in the cafeteria one day when the motto was placed up. See, the cafeteria was a place where all the men lined up to get their meals. noontime, and we could catch them all there at one time or another during the day. And the motto read, just remember that your real boss is the one who walks around under your hat. I'd think that would be as plain as mud to anybody that would read it. It would mean that you're the real boss in final analysis. But I heard a man let out an Indian yell, and he said, boy, that's what I've always said. I've always known that my foreman was a louse. Now, up at the top of the page there is a method by which one may transmute failure into success, poverty into riches, sorrow into joy, fear into faith. The transmutation must start with a positive mental attitude, because success, riches, and faith do not make bedfellows with a negative mental attitude. The transmutation procedure is simple. Now, here it is. And you can very well afford to come back to this many times and assimilate it and make it your own. Number one, when failure overtakes you, start thinking of it as if it had been a success. Do you think that would be difficult to do? Yeah. Do you think it would? No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't at all. In other words, thinking of it, what would have happened if it had been a success instead of a failure? Seeing yourself in the success side of the situation and not in the failure side. Start imagining or imaging the circumstances of the failures in your own imagination as being a success. Start also looking for the seed of an equivalent benefit which comes with every failure. And there is where you will be able to transmute the failure into success. Because every adversity, every failure, and every defeat has the seed of an equivalent benefit. And if you go to searching for that seed, you will not take a negative mental attitude toward the circumstance. You take a positive mental attitude, because you're sure to find that seed. You may not find it the first time you look for it, but eventually you will find it if you keep on. That's step number one. Number two, when poverty threatens to catch up with you or has actually caught up, start thinking of it as riches, and visualize the riches in all the things that you would wish to do with actual riches. Also start looking for the seed of an equivalent benefit of poverty. I remember when I was a little boy, sitting on the bank of the river down in Wise County, where I was born, just after my mother had died, before my stepmother came along. I was hungry. I didn't have enough food. I was sitting there on the bank of the river, wondering if I couldn't catch some fish and maybe fry some fish and have something to eat. And as I sat there, I don't know what caused me to do this, but I shut my eyes and looked into the future, and I saw myself going away, becoming famous, wealthy, and coming back to that very spot, charging up the river on a horse, a mechanical horse that was run by steam. I could see the steam pouring out of his nostrils. I could hear his horseshoes clicking on the rocks. It was so vivid to me. In other words, I built myself into a state of ecstasy there in that hour of poverty and need and want and hunger. Years passed, and the time came when I drove my Rolls Royce into that very spot, the car that I paid $22,500 for. I drove my Rolls Royce into that very spot. And I went back and imaged again that childhood scene where I had been there in poverty and in want and in hunger. And I said, well, I don't know whether my imaging this back in the early days had anything to do with it or not. Maybe it did. Maybe I kept alive that hope and eventually translated that hope into faith, and eventually that faith brought me not only a steam horse, but something of much more valuable and much more costly than a steam horse. Looking forward and imaging the things that you want to do, transmuting unfavorable circumstances and adversities into something that's pleasant. By that I mean switching your mind away from thinking about the unpleasant things over to something that's pleasant. And then again, number three, when fear overtakes you, just remember that fear is only faith in reverse gear. And start thinking in terms of faith by seeing yourself translating faith into whatever circumstance or things you desire. I don't suppose anybody ever escapes experiencing the 7 basic fears at one time or another. And most people experience them all the way through life. But certainly if you allow fear to take possession of you and to grip you, it'll become a habit, and it certainly will attract to you all of the things that you don't want. You have to learn to deal with fear by transmuting it or translating it or transforming it over in your mind into something the opposite of fear. In other words, faith. If you fear poverty, commence thinking of yourselves in terms of opulence and of money, and thinking of ways and means that you're going to earn that money and acquire it, what you're going to do with it after you get it. Why you can daydream, and there's no end to the daydreaming you can do. And it's far better to daydream about the money you're going to have than it is to fear the poverty that you know you already have. I'll assure you, this is no virtue and no benefit in sitting down and bemoaning the fact that you are poverty-stricken or that you need money and you don't know how to get it. I honestly believe that there isn't anything in this world that I need that money can buy or that anything else can buy that I can't get if I want it. I don't think in terms of what I can't get. I think in terms of what I can get. And I've been doing that for a long time, and it's a wonderful thing with which to condition your mind to be positive. So that when the circumstances arise where you need a positive mental action, you're in the habit of reacting in a positive way at all times rather than in a negative way. You don't get a positive mental attitude just by wishing for it. You get it by weaving a cord of the rope at a time, day by day, little at a time. You don't just get it overnight.